The cell is the basic unit of life. The cell is the basic unit of animation. Edward Muybridge is a name I first heard back when I took an animation class. This man was one of the first people to use photography to study animal locomotion. He killed his wife's lover, a crime for which he was never convicted. In a time before film, he produced hundreds of plates such as these. Speaking of plates, Ernst Haeckel was an artist and naturalist who was famous for sketching what he called radiolaria, and he is the subject of a phenomenal animated documentary called Proteus. A contemporary of Darwin, Haeckel discovered beauty through microscopy. The very first enlarged images to be captured on film, however, were those photographed by Jean Painlevé, a French surrealist filmmaker who paved the way for Jacques Cousteau and David Attenborough. Some years ago, I tried to animate segments taken from modern nature films in an attempt to make a music video, but the project was never completed. My passion for animals never left me, so I made it my mission to teach myself how to draw them. I went to various zoos and museums. One friend described a sketch I made of a primate as the saddest monkey I've ever seen. The truth about our relationship to our closest cousins is a depressing business these days. When I decided to make this video, I pictured the stacks of old cells gathering dust in my closet and realized the irony of animation as a medium to represent animals. How many trees had to die for Ferngully to exist? Can we truly paint with all the colors of the wind, or is it more accurate to say that we can paint with all the pigments of the earth, the plant, the arthropod? It's easy to be a critic, but the irony applied to me as well. How could I express my passion for animals without further destroying their habitats? How could I teach myself to sketch their beauty without killing my subjects, however indirectly? Edward Muybridge provided one partial answer to these questions. His plates were easy to replicate, and they almost always provide the animator with at least a full cycle of motion. Therefore, I was able to create an entire animated sequence, or sometimes more, using only one sheet of paper. Another irony presented itself. In order to make these animations happen, I would have to retreat further away from so-called natural and organic materials such as dead trees and ink, and spend a lot more time editing on the computer. The end result still looks handmade though, and this was important to me. I wanted to avoid at all costs having my project look like this. A second answer was provided by following the example of Haeckel, who employed microscopes to create his drawings. I used a magnifying lens to trace his plates and save space on the page, as well as ink. But what about the more complex animations? The ones that don't fall into a cyclical pattern of motion and require hundreds of cells to look convincing? Well, that answer was provided by the stacks of neglected paper in my closet. Out they came, and it was surprisingly easy to find wide areas to draw in. If one animator out there watches this video and is inspired to use some of these methods to save paper, then I shall have reached my utilitarian objective. However, there is also an emotional part to my agenda. Some say God is a composer who wrote the symphony of life. Some believe he is an artist who has painted a beautiful landscape for our eyes to enjoy. I disagree on both accounts, not only because I find supernatural explanations ultimately unsatisfactory, but because these analogies seem not to tell the whole story. If God had written music, I would like to say he wrote a theme and variations. But I don't think he is any of these things. The cell is the basic unit of life. The cell is the basic unit of animation. To animate is to give life. So, if God exists, he is a very skilled, yet cynical, animator.